You know that moment when you're walking through a place you helped build, brick by brick, and realize you're now invisible in it? That happened to me at 8:40 a.m. on a Tuesday. The hallway lights buzzed like always. The air smelled faintly of burned coffee, but the silence felt different, like something had shifted, quietly, but permanently. My name is Kaya Ellington, and 15 years ago, I co-founded Solvanta Energy in a garage in Northeast Portland. Back then, we had 3 engineers, 2 servers, and one belief that sustainable energy could be both powerful and ethical. I built the R&D division from scratch, leading innovations that turned us from a scrappy startup into a $310 million powerhouse. We didn't just file patents, we set standards. Now I was walking past floor-to-ceiling glass panels toward the common area when I noticed something strange. Through the thick pane of glass in the executive conference room, I saw Nolan Grant, the new CEO, standing next to Tasha Mercer, the freshly hired head of HR. They were staring at a giant screen. And there it was, a new organizational chart. The structure was crisp, clean, and unfamiliar. I stepped closer, just enough to see without being seen. My heart slowed. The section labeled Research and Development was highlighted in red. A red that felt less like review and more like removal. Tasha pointed toward it and said something. I couldn't hear her, but Nolan nodded. They both laughed, softly, but with certainty, like people who'd already made a decision. I stood frozen next to a newly installed fern, one of the plants Tasha brought in to promote mindfulness. The irony tasted bitter. I wasn't shocked, not really. The signs had been there for months, being left off key meeting invites, budget approvals that never came, project updates that went unanswered. My last 4 research proposals hadn't even been acknowledged. I had become a ghost in the building I helped construct. Later that morning, I was summoned to a realignment session. Tasha greeted me with a bright corporate smile and a clipboard. Kira, thanks for coming. Sorry, Kaya. Yes. She said my name wrong again, twice, in a room of 3 people. She glanced at her notes. We're sunsetting some legacy roles. It's not personal. It's just synergy. I looked down at the folder in my lap. It had my name misspelled on the label. 15 years. And somehow, I was the one who had become a clerical error. I didn't cry in the car. That surprised me. The parking lot outside Solvanta shimmered with heat. But inside my chest, there was only stillness, sharp and still, like the pause before a thunderclap. I turned the key in the ignition, let the engine hum beneath my fingertips, and drove home in silence. Not out of defeat, but focus. The humiliation from that morning, the misspoken name, the laminated org chart, the word sunsetting used like it wasn't a funeral, had burned clean through. All that remained was clarity. By 10:15 a.m., I was back in my house on Mount Tabor. I didn't bother taking off my shoes. I walked straight into my home office, the only space in my life that still recognized me. The air smelled like cedar and old books. The bookshelf to my left sagged with 15 years of scientific journals. Framed patents lined the wall, my name etched in each one. But it was the steel safe beneath my desk that I knelt in front of. Combination 4197. My father's birthday. The lock clicked open. Inside were the founding documents of Solvanta Energy, the original incorporation paperwork, partnership agreements, and a heavy, leather-bound binder marked Charter and Intellectual Property Licensing, Private. I hadn't touched it in over a decade, but I knew exactly what I was looking for. I flipped past pages of legalese until I reached a tab labeled Section 5C, Founder's Clause. There it was, my insurance policy, my silent weapon, in the event that any original founding party is terminated without cause or by non-mutual consent. Said party retains the unilateral right to revoke, in full, all associated licenses pertaining to proprietary technology contributed by said party to the corporation. The wording had been crafted carefully. I remembered fighting for that clause when we were nobodies in a garage, wiring servers with duct tape. I'd seen too many stories of creators being erased. I made sure I wouldn't become one. And the best part? The clause had been signed by every founding member, including Nolan Grant. He hadn't been CEO back then. He was our finance lead. Eager, skinny, a bit arrogant, but sharp. I flipped to the final page. And there it was, his slanted signature, directly beneath mine, dated and notarized, and just beneath the signature block. In my own handwriting from a meeting we'd recorded, clause acknowledged and approved, audio minutes archived, file, founders, recording, March 07.wave. The audio file still sat in a locked folder on my encrypted drive. I sat back in my chair, the edges of the page still warm beneath my fingers. This wasn't revenge, not yet, but it was the beginning of something that could become it. Solvanta didn't just push me out. They pushed out my work, my vision, my name. They forgot that ideas don't live in filing cabinets. They live in people. And they made the fatal mistake of forgetting I was still very much alive, and that the foundation of their empire was built, in part, from my contribution. I didn't rage, I didn't scream. Instead, I opened a blank legal pad and picked up a pen, wrote the words, Notice of Revocation, Preliminary Draft, at the top. Then I texted Marcel, Need to meet. Founder's clause is in play. Nolan signed it himself. 3 dots. Then his reply, Oh my God! He has no idea what he's stepped in. On my way. I closed the binder with care. The sound echoed in the stillness of the room. Not all wars start with a bang. Some begin with the sound of a safe opening. By 8:30 a.m. the next morning, I was sitting across from Marcel Green, my attorney of 14 years, in his corner office overlooking the Willamette River. His desk was a mess of legal pads, empty coffee cups, and printed email chains, all artifacts of battles won. He was already in motion, flipping through the binder I'd brought the night before, like it contained the nuclear codes. This clause, he said, tapping the page with the back of his pen, is not vague, it's precise, aggressively enforceable. And they signed it. Nolan did, I confirmed. He probably doesn't remember, but I do. Marcel leaned back in his chair. We don't scream, we don't threaten. We serve them what they fear most, documentation. And so we did. We drafted the Notice of Intent to revoke intellectual property licensing, citing Section 5C of Solvanta Energy's Founders Agreement. The language was ice cold, pursuant to the terms of the binding Founders Charter. I am notifying you that effective 30 days from receipt of this letter, unless corrective action is taken, I will revoke the license to the following proprietary technologies. We attached a detailed appendix listing the specific patents that I had contributed, 12 of them, forming the backbone of Solvanta's current product line. The letters were printed on heavyweight paper, notarized, and sealed in 10 identical envelopes addressed to each member of the board. Nolan and Tasha. Marcel insisted we use certified mail with return receipt. No emails, no electronic files, no room for, I didn't see it. By 11:40 a.m., we were at the downtown post office. I handed the envelopes to the clerk one by one, hearing each satisfying thud of the official stamp. That sound, it didn't echo like a war cry. It was quieter, heavier, the sound of something inevitable. And then we waited. I didn't have to wait long. By 2:30 p.m., my phone buzzed with a message from someone still inside Solvanta, Elena Rowe, head of sustainability and an old friend. Tasha just opened your letter in the executive lounge. She read one line, rolled her eyes, and, Kaya! She shredded it, in front of everyone. I stared at the message for a full minute before replying. Did anyone say anything? 3 of us were there. She laughed and said, She's bluffing. We'll bury her in paperwork. She thought it was a joke, that I was posturing. That this was all just a dramatic goodbye from someone who didn't understand how real power worked. But what she didn't know, what she couldn't fathom, was that this wasn't noise. It wasn't a performance. It was a contractual tripwire designed to snap shut the moment they stepped out of line. And they had stepped, by destroying a certified legal document in front of witnesses. She didn't weaken my position. She strengthened it. Marcel called it willful negligence. It was the legal equivalent of seeing a warning light on the dash and flooring the gas anyway. I sat back in my chair at home, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across my office. I didn't feel rage or triumph, just momentum. I forwarded Elena's message to Marcel. A few seconds later, his response came in. Incredible! We don't respond. Let them keep digging. And so I didn't. I spent the rest of the afternoon not refreshing email, not scrolling stock prices, but tending to my sister Riley, who was resting in the sunroom after a long morning of treatment. I read her a chapter from her favorite book, helped her eat half a sandwich, and brushed her hair gently behind her ears as she drifted off to sleep. This wasn't just about me anymore. It never really was. That night, I stood by my office window with a cup of tea, watching the last bit of daylight disappear behind downtown Portland. They thought I was bluffing. They thought silence meant surrender. But silence can also mean certainty. And I was certain I wasn't done. Not even close. By 8:05 a.m. the next morning, I was back in my office, watering the potted ficus near the window, not out of care for the plant, but because routine had always been my quiet armor. I didn't flinch when my phone lit up with a new message. It was from an unknown number, no name, just a Dropbox link and a 3-word message. You should see this. I hesitated, just for a second, then clicked. The video was less than 30 seconds long. Grainy. A bit off-center, but unmistakable. Tasha Mercer stood at the head of the executive lounge, holding the certified envelope I had sent the day before. Her tone was flippant, her voice sharp. Apparently, Kaya thinks this is still her company. She opened the envelope, scanned the letter, then smirked. Let's not indulge the drama, she said, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear. Then she walked to the shredder in the corner, slid the paper in, and pressed the button. The machine buzzed. The letter vanished. Behind her, 3 managers, faces I recognized from my early days, watched silently. One of them, I now knew, had pressed record. I played the video twice. Then once more, slower. No one spoke up. No one stopped her. But someone with a conscience, or maybe just foresight, had hit record. And now that moment lived outside their walls. I forwarded the video to Marcel without comment. Less than a minute later, my phone rang. I watched it twice, he said, his tone precise. That's willful negligence on camera. She destroyed formal legal notice with witnesses present. They can't claim ignorance now. This changes everything. I nodded, even though he couldn't see me. We don't use it yet. Correct, he said. We just hold it. Let the rope tighten. I hung up and let the phone rest face down on the desk. I wasn't here to gloat. I was here to build the record. By 12:30 p.m., another message arrived. This one through Proton Mail, encrypted and anonymous. The subject line was a single word. Clause. The message read, You don't know me. I work in legal. We warned them 2 months ago about your licensing clause. There's an internal memo flagged by our IP team. They ignored it. There are email threads, screenshots if needed. I'll send more soon. No signature, no trace. But I didn't need one. The tone, the language, it was real. Someone on the inside had seen this coming, and now they were ready to help me pull the thread. I replied only once. Thank you. Be careful. Then I closed the laptop, leaned back, and breathed in the weight of it all. I wasn't angry. I wasn't desperate. I was in control. Solvanta's leadership had mistaken my silence for surrender, my professionalism for fragility. But what I was building wasn't noise. It was foundation. And every arrogant move they made only gave me more material to work with. By 3:45 p.m., I received confirmation that the video had been timestamped and backed up on a secure server. Marcel filed it under Contingency Package A later that evening, while Riley dozed off to a documentary in the living room. I updated my personal log with a single entry, Day 3. They think the letter is gone. They don't know the recording exists. And someone inside is watching. Then I made tea, folded the laundry, and sent flowers anonymously to the engineer who recorded the video. White tulips. The note read, "Thank you for remembering. I didn't need chaos. I didn't need revenge. What I needed was to keep collecting truth, piece by piece, until they collapsed under the weight of what they ignored." Control doesn't always come with noise. Sometimes, it moves quietly through hallways, backed by facts, and waits. By 7:50 a.m. on Monday, I was tending to the garden behind my house, clipping rosemary sprigs and watching the sun crawl slowly up the east slope of Mount Tabor. I hadn't checked my email in 12 hours. Not out of negligence, but because I didn't need to. The clock was ticking, and I knew where the pressure would hit first. At 8:02 a.m., Marcel called. "You might want to sit for this," he said. I didn't sit, I just listened. "The Amsterdam contract," he continued. "Solvanta's trying to close the deal this week, 40 million over 3 years. Only now, their partners are asking questions." "What kind of questions?" I asked, though I already knew. "They're requesting updated documentation on IP ownership. The Dutch legal team flagged the founding license. Apparently, they want written assurance that your technology is still legally in use by the company. The phrase they used was, 'clean chain of custody.'" I smiled, just barely. "And they don't have it?" "Nope. They've been stalling for 2 days. But this morning, the Dutch team escalated. They sent an email to Solvanta's executive team and," he paused, "they CC'd the full board." I turned from the garden bed and walked back into the house. "Do you have it?" "It just hit my inbox," he said. "Want me to forward it?" "No," I said calmly. "Read it to me." Marcel cleared his throat, and I could hear the quiet satisfaction in his voice too. Quote, "We appreciate the urgency surrounding this transaction. However, as part of standard compliance protocol, we require written confirmation that all proprietary technologies under license are current and enforceable. Specifically, we request a signed addendum confirming continued authorization from Ms. Kaya Ellington, listed as a founding licensor in the original U.S. patent filings." End quote. I let that hang in the air between us. No threats, no shouting, just a simple question, a signature-shaped hole, and they couldn't fill it. "Do we respond?" Marcel asked. "Not yet," I said. "Let them scramble." By 10:15 a.m., the email had been forwarded to me by 2 different former colleagues, both with variations of the same note. "You might want to see this." I replied to neither. I simply archived them and went back to my garden. From what I later heard, the reaction inside Solvanta was instant chaos. The legal team rushed to draft a response, but had no authority to confirm what they couldn't legally support. Nolan apparently snapped at an associate general counsel in front of half the Amsterdam negotiation team. Tasha, ever the cool front woman, dismissed it as a routine hiccup. But no one believed her, not with 40 million hanging in limbo. At 1:20 p.m., I received a third message, this time from a familiar name, Eva Jansen, lead counsel for the Dutch firm. She wrote, "Ms. Ellington, though we are not currently authorized to speak with you directly on behalf of Solvanta, I wanted to extend a private appreciation. The integrity of your licensing record is impeccable. You've made an impression." I stared at her message for a moment, then deleted it. That was all the validation I needed. By the time the markets closed that day, Solvanta had issued no press release, no damage control. The delay in Amsterdam wasn't public, yet. But behind their closed doors, the foundation had cracked, and everyone who mattered had seen the fissure. Later that evening, as Riley and I made dinner together, her hands finally steady enough to stir the pasta, I told her the story. She smiled faintly. "You don't even have to swing," she said. "They're falling on their own." She was right. I hadn't sent threats. I hadn't made calls. I'd simply pulled back what was mine and waited. And now, they were learning. Sometimes, the sharpest weapons are the ones you never have to raise. The storm they feared was already forming, but instead of bracing for it, Solvanta tried to pretend the sky was clear. By 9:07 a.m. on Thursday, Marcel forwarded me a scanned copy of a federal document that had quietly changed everything. The subject line of his email read only, "They finally tried it." It was an official response from the United States Patent and Trademark Office, a formal denial of Solvanta's attempt to amend the core patent license associated with the foundational clean energy system I'd developed. They had submitted a request to revise the ownership chain, specifically, to strike my name from the licensing records, and they had failed. I opened the file and read the rejection aloud in my office, just to hear the words in the air. Request denied. Application is incomplete. Required signature of original licensing party, Ms. Kaya Ellington, was not provided. Filing is invalid without consent from all original signatories. There it was, in black and white. Government ink that no executive PowerPoint could erase. I texted Marcel. "It's official. They tried to rewrite history," he replied within seconds. "And the system remembered your name, exactly as we planned." I didn't smile, but I exhaled, deeply. It wasn't triumph I felt. It was certainty. Solvanta could pretend I was irrelevant in meetings, white out my legacy on internal memos, and call me a former contributor in investor calls. But the one place they couldn't touch me was the record. And the record didn't forget. At 11:30 a.m., something unexpected happened. A message pinged in my inbox from Ari Kessler, a journalist I vaguely remembered from a sustainability conference years ago. He now wrote for Green Tech Watch, a publication known for its deep dives into energy sector politics and patent disputes. His message was brief but direct. "Ms. Ellington, I've been following the licensing patterns around Solvanta's IP filings. This morning, I noticed a rejected amendment attempt on the federal system with your name still listed as primary licenser. Curious if you'd care to comment, even off the record. Full discretion, if you prefer." So they'd tried to sneak it through quietly. And in doing so, they'd left the door open for someone else to notice. I didn't respond immediately. Instead, I forwarded the email to Marcel. He called within a minute. "Do not comment, not yet, let's monitor." "Do you think he'll run with it?" "If he's smart, he'll hold the thread and pull." I closed the email window and sat back in my chair, looking at the 3 original patent certificates framed on my wall, each one still carrying my name in sharp, unalterable print, uneditable ink. That's what power really is. Not shouting the loudest in the boardroom, not having the biggest budget or the slickest legal team. It's having your name in the one place they can't revise, redact, or reframe. And they had just discovered the hard way that no internal reorg, no HR memo, no public-facing denial could override a federal registration backed by a signature that still belonged to me. That afternoon, I poured tea, opened a blank journal, and wrote only 3 words across the top of the page. They tried editing. Underneath it, I drew a single, bold line, unbroken. A reminder that my part in Solvanta's foundation wasn't a story they could rewrite. By 4:05 p.m., the article hadn't dropped, but I had no doubt it would. Whether Ari wrote the piece or simply watched, the crack in their wall had become visible, and there was no patching it now. I returned to the garden just as the sun began to dip behind the roof lines. Riley was sitting quietly on the bench. Reading? I sat beside her, neither of us speaking, because sometimes the most powerful move is knowing you don't have to do anything at all. You just have to stand steady and let the facts settle like stone. And that day, I felt the ground under me, solid, undeniable, unshakable, by 8:15 a.m. on Friday. Word had already started to spread through the quiet corners of the building. Nolan Grant was holding a mandatory all-hands meeting. The last time something like this happened. We had just won a national grant for renewable infrastructure, back then. We gathered with coffee in hand and smiles on our faces. This time, the mood was different, stiff, watchful. Solvanta was showing cracks, and everyone could feel the ground shift beneath their feet. I didn't attend the meeting, of course, but by 9:01 a.m., the full recording landed in my inbox, sent anonymously from an old colleague. The subject line was bitterly dry. Leadership in action. I clicked the file and let it play. Nolan stood at the front of the company's main auditorium. Sleeves rolled up. Expression tense, but polished. He scanned the crowd as if preparing for a friendly fireside chat. "Look, I want to address the elephant in the room," he began, pacing slowly. "You've probably heard rumors about a licensing issue, about one of our former staff members causing trouble. Let me be absolutely clear. This is a temporary distraction, nothing more." The camera panned across the audience, tight jaws, narrowed eyes, too many crossed arms. Nolan continued, voice louder now. "We are not under threat. We are not under investigation. We are not facing any real liability. The technology is ours. The systems are ours. And we will continue business as usual." Then came the part that made my stomach tighten. He paused, then smirked ever so slightly before adding, "This is the work of a disgruntled ex-staffer with a personal vendetta. Let's stay focused on what really matters." That word, disgruntled, hung in the air like smoke from an engine fire. It was casual, dismissive, meant to shrink me down to nothing more than a bitter footnote. But I wasn't angry. I was cold. I rewound the recording and watched again. This time, pausing on the faces in the front row. Tasha nodding along. The CFO looking distinctly uncomfortable. And several engineers exchanging glances that suggested not everyone was buying it. By 11:20 a.m., I received another email. It came from a name I hadn't seen in over a year. Raj Devani, one of the senior engineers I'd hired myself during Solvanta's growth phase. Quiet, brilliant, always the first to volunteer for late-night prototype tests. He'd been laid off 6 months ago in one of Tasha's strategic streamlining rounds. His message was simple. "Kaya, I've been following what's happening. I can't stay silent anymore. You need to see this." Attached was a zip file titled Internal IP Risks email thread. I opened it slowly, not because I doubted him, but because I already knew what I'd find. The emails began 3 months before my termination. Legal team members had flagged the founder's clause and raised concern that removing me without consent could trigger licensing vulnerabilities. One message, from a junior legal analyst. Read, "Kaya's name is embedded in at least 5 federal patent filings. If she walks and we haven't restructured that license, it's a litigation risk." Another reply from Tasha, short, clipped, simply said, "We'll manage, if she pushes back. We test legal waters, then adjust." My hands tightened around the edge of the desk. Not from shock, but from the sheer restraint it took not to let fury take the wheel. They hadn't just forgotten. They hadn't just fumbled. They had seen the warning signs, read the fine print, and chosen to proceed anyway, confident I would stay quiet. That was their mistake. I forwarded the entire thread to Marcel. Subject line, "They knew." His reply came a minute later. "Perfect. Chain of knowledge. plus decision to ignore, liability goldmine, we wait. So I waited. That night, as Portland's skyline blinked quietly in the distance, I sat beside Riley while she slept and played the meeting recording again. This time, only the part where Nolan called me disgruntled. I didn't scream. I didn't curse. I just whispered under my breath. You're going to wish I had been. The fire was still beneath the floor. Contained. For now. By 7:55 a.m. on Monday. I was slicing strawberries in the kitchen when Marcel's name lit up my phone. No text. A direct call. I wiped my hands on a dish towel and answered. Morning, I said. They filed. He replied without preamble. Solvanta's suing you. I didn't flinch. I didn't ask what for. I simply walked to the window, let the morning sun hit my face, and waited. Allegation? I asked. Corporate extortion, he said. They're framing the notice of revocation as a coercive act. That your intent was to threaten the company into an unjust settlement using intellectual property you no longer have the right to control. I exhaled through my nose, slow and steady. They're bluffing with a live grenade. Yep, Marcel agreed. But what they don't realize is, they just handed us the detonator. He sounded almost amused. I knew why. Because by initiating legal action, Solvanta had triggered discovery, a process that would now legally compel them to produce every document, communication, and memo related to my termination, the licensing clause, and their internal decisions. They had opened the door and invited us in. Start pulling the subpoenas, I said. Marcel's voice sharpened. Already drafting them, emails, meeting notes, Slack threads, archived cloud folders. If someone at Solvanta so much as whispered your name over lunch, we'll get it. By 11:20 a.m., I was sitting in his office, reviewing the complaint. The language was aggressive, polished, and condescending. They painted me as a bitter former executive using legacy knowledge to interfere with active contracts and artificially destabilize company operations. They cited the Amsterdam delay as evidence of harm. But what struck me most wasn't the hostility. It was the carelessness. They'd attached a scanned version of a licensing document, my own name redacted by hand in one corner. It had been whited out, then rescanned, sloppily. You could still faintly see the outline of the letters KAIA beneath the correction. I stared at it for a long moment. Is this real? I asked. Marcel nodded. And it gets better. Their metadata's a mess. One of my tech guys pulled the document's original file trail. That page was altered last month, right after your termination. They tried to retroactively erase you from a binding federal agreement. And then used it as evidence in a lawsuit, I said, finishing the thought. Exactly, he replied. Which means they submitted altered documentation to the court. That's not just a mistake, that's fraud, I said flatly. Marcel's smile was grim. At the very least, misrepresentation. At worst, perjury. We didn't raise our voices. We didn't high-five. We simply filed the document, marked it as evidence, and added it to a folder titled Counterclaim, Reserved. By 3:04 p.m., I was back home, sitting with Riley while she rested on the couch. She was between treatments that week, too tired to eat much, but alert enough to notice the shift in my posture. You look like someone who just walked into a trap and found out it was already empty, she said. I gave her a soft smile. They sued me. She blinked. That's insane. No, I said. It's perfect. That night, I poured myself a glass of wine, not in celebration, but in clarity. I pulled out a legal pad and began outlining every move, every misstep they'd made since the day they pushed me out. There was no emotion in the bullet points, just facts, just evidence, just leverage. Solvanta thought the courtroom would intimidate me, that I'd backpedal, panic, settle, But they'd made a critical miscalculation. They assumed I hadn't kept the receipts. They assumed silence meant weakness. They assumed wrong. By 10:40 p.m., Marcel messaged me one last time before turning in for the night. They just stepped onto the battlefield. Now we lead. I replied simply, let's show them what a real foundation looks like. The calm before the counterattack isn't empty. It's loaded. And they'd just given me a reason to pull the trigger. By 7:15 a.m. on Wednesday, my inbox held a message I hadn't dared to hope for, but wasn't surprised to see. The subject line read simply, I'm ready to speak. The sender, Dr. Henry Locke, co-founder and former CEO of Solvanta Energy. The man I had built the company with from the ground up. The man who once said to me, in the glow of our first prototype, ideas can power cities, but integrity keeps the lights on. He had retired 3 years ago, stepping aside during the acquisition with grace and intention. I hadn't spoken to him in over a year. I opened the email with steady hands. Kaya, I've been watching what's happening from a distance, and I can't stay silent any longer. The clause you're invoking wasn't some legal formality. It was our safety valve. We wrote it to protect the soul of this company. You were always that soul. If you need a statement or testimony, I'll give it. Sworn, public, whatever's required. Henry, I read it twice, then a third time. The air in the room felt different, thicker, but steadier. It wasn't just moral support. It was legal reinforcement from a man whose name was still engraved on the original bylaws, alongside mine. By 8:03 a.m., I had forwarded the message to Marcel with a single line. He's in. Marcel's response was almost immediate. That's it. That seals your credibility. If they want to play legacy versus liability, we've got legacy on our side. He then added, I'll prep the affidavit draft. We'll record a statement if he's willing. Let me know if you want to meet him in person or keep it remote. The momentum was shifting, but the quiet fire in my chest didn't settle. It sharpened. I wasn't just fighting for my work anymore. I was fighting for what the company used to mean, for the version of Solvanta that believed in innovation over optics, substance over spin. Later that afternoon, at 1:26 p.m., another email arrived, this time from a name I recognized, but hadn't expected. Vivian Tran, one of Solvanta's board members, a finance veteran, razor sharp, always calculated. Her email was brief, private. Kaya, just a heads up, I believe Nolan and Tasha will reach out to negotiate soon. Don't buy into it. The board isn't unified, and their side is unraveling faster than they're admitting. They'll frame it as peace. It's not. V. I stared at the screen for a long moment. My fingers hovered over the keyboard, then withdrew. Vivian wasn't just warning me. She was signaling something else. Fracture. The board was split. The leadership was cracking, and someone on the inside was beginning to choose a side. I didn't respond to her message. There was no need. She had said what mattered. That evening, I met Marcel downtown at a quiet coffee shop tucked behind a row of galleries. We sat in a booth near the window, a small recording device placed discreetly between us. At 7:04 p.m., Dr. Henry Locke joined us. His presence hadn't changed. Tall, calm, with that weathered academic energy. He shook my hand firmly, then looked me in the eye and said, They forgot who started this place. Let's remind them. For the next hour, he detailed the history of the clause, why it was drafted, how it was unanimously approved, and why removing a founding contributor was always meant to carry consequences. His voice was composed, factual. Every sentence landed with the kind of authority you can't manufacture. When he finished, he slid the signed affidavit across the table and stood. I built the house, he said softly, but you kept the lights on. Don't let them dim what you made. I watched him walk out into the dusk and realized something I hadn't felt in weeks. I wasn't alone. They had tried to erase me, one form at a time, But they hadn't counted on the people I'd built the foundation with. Now, I didn't just have evidence. I had witnesses. I had allies. And the walls around them were starting to lean inward. By 8:20 a.m. on Monday, I had convinced myself, against my better judgment, that maybe they were ready to do the right thing. The email from Solvanta's board had come through the night before. Polite, formal, marked, confidential. The board of directors would like to extend an invitation to meet privately to discuss a mutually agreeable resolution regarding the licensing dispute. Attendance is voluntary but encouraged. Monday at noon. Conference room A17, South Wing. No lawyers, no court reporters. Just a conversation. Marcel had reviewed it carefully and said what I already knew. It's not binding. It's not even formal. But if they're calling this meeting, it means they're worried. You've got leverage. Go in. Just don't expect sincerity. Still, part of me hoped. Maybe they were finally ready to admit fault, to acknowledge the damage, to stop pretending I hadn't helped build the foundation they were now standing on. At 12:01 p.m., I stepped into conference room A17. It was cold, sleek, the kind of room designed to impress clients, not host difficult truths. At the long glass table sat 3 members of the board, Vivian Tran, Marcus Feld, and Harold Lenz. Nolan and Tasha were noticeably absent. Vivian gestured to the seat across from her. "Kaya, thank you for coming." I sat without speaking. My bag stayed zipped, my spine straight. Marcus opened a folder and cleared his throat. "Let's begin. We've reviewed the current situation, including the original licensing agreements, your formal notice, and the legal implications of continued IP usage." I nodded. "And?" Harold jumped in. "There's no benefit to prolonged conflict, for either side. We propose a private resolution, discreet, off the record." Vivian leaned forward, hands folded like a mediator. "The board is prepared to offer you a settlement package, 7 figures, full NDA. In exchange, you'll agree to suspend enforcement of the revocation for 6 months. That will allow our shareholders to stabilize, and for the company to realign its leadership quietly." I blinked. Slowly. 6 months of silence. For a price. They weren't negotiating. They were managing risk. They weren't asking for truth. They were buying time. I looked at each of them. "So this isn't about correcting the record. It's about market optics." Vivian's jaw tensed. "It's about protecting what's still salvageable." "And what happens in month 7? I asked. "You reinstate the license? Or pretend this conversation never happened?" Harold shrugged. "You'd be free to take any action you deemed appropriate, once the cooling period ends." My hands were steady, my voice even. "You're asking me to pretend nothing happened, in exchange for hush money." Vivian didn't flinch. "We're offering a graceful exit." I smiled, not kindly. "I'm not looking for grace. I'm looking for accountability." For a moment, no one spoke. Then I leaned forward, placed both hands flat on the table, and said clearly, "This meeting is over, within 24 hours. I'll issue a public statement confirming the formal and permanent revocation of Solvanta's licensing rights." Harold sat back. "You'll tank the company." "No," I replied. "You already did." At 12:30 p.m., I walked out of the building I once helped build, the false promise of resolution trailing behind me like a fog that never quite touched the ground. Outside, the air felt sharp, clean. Marcel called as I crossed the parking lot. "How'd it go?" "They offered money," I said, "in exchange for silence." "And you?" I gave them a countdown. That night, as Riley curled up under a wool blanket beside me, she asked quietly, "Did they finally say sorry?" "No," I said. "They offered cash instead." She nodded, like she understood something deeper than I'd put into words. "Then they still don't get it." "No, they didn't. This wasn't about revenge. It wasn't about ego. It wasn't even about control. It was about truth, the kind that can't be bought, spun, or silenced. Not for 6 months. Not ever. And now, they would hear it. So would everyone else. By 8:28 a.m., I was already at my desk, sipping lukewarm coffee, waiting for the seconds to tick down. 30 days. That was the window they were given, not to apologize, not even to correct course, just to respond with integrity. They hadn't. No legal appeal, no retraction, no acknowledgement of the licensing clause they'd tried to erase. Instead, they'd bet on silence, delay, arrogance. But now, time had run out. At 8:30 a.m. sharp, Marcel clicked send on the final version of the press release we'd prepared over the past week. It was distributed to all major outlets: Bloomberg, Reuters, TechWire, Green Tech Watch, and the U.S. Patent and Trademark Office Registry. The headline was simple and sharp. KAA, Ellington revokes licensing agreement with Solvanta Energy. Intellectual property use now unlawful. The language inside was clean, legal, unapologetic, pursuant to Section 5C of the Solvanta Energy Founders Agreement, and in accordance with the 30-day notice previously issued. All licensing rights granted to Solvanta Energy related to proprietary energy storage and grid optimization technologies developed by Ms. Kaya Ellington are hereby formally and irrevocably revoked. Effective immediately. Within minutes. The blast took on a life of its own. By 9:02 a.m., the story was trending on LinkedIn. By 9:15, calls began flooding into Solvanta's investor hotline. And at 9:30, the company's stock, already fragile, was suspended from public trading due to unconfirmed material disruption to core operations. But I wasn't watching the headlines. I was sitting in my garden, trimming lavender and letting the hum of a distant lawnmower blur into the breeze. Riley was on the porch, a book in her lap, blanket tucked over her legs. She looked up at me and smiled. "Is it done?" "Yes," I said. "Finally." Marcel texted me at 10:06 a.m. They've pulled the countersuit. No apology, no admission, just gone. No statement, no explanation, just a quiet retreat after weeks of barking. I should have felt vindicated or triumphant. But what I felt instead was something deeper. A loosening. A long-held breath, finally released. By 11:20 a.m., news broke from within. A leaked internal memo revealed that both Nolan Grant and Tasha Mercer had been terminated by unanimous board vote. Effective immediately. The reason? Failure to disclose material legal risk and willful obstruction of contractual compliance. The collapse had begun. Quietly. Then, all at once. Every product Solvanta had built on my technology was now in violation. They couldn't ship, couldn't sell, couldn't renew existing contracts. Not legally, not anymore. The systems I once helped design were now dormant code and idle hardware, waiting for a license that no longer existed. Later that afternoon, I received a call from an unknown number. I didn't answer. Then another. Then 3 emails from board members. I ignored them all. They'd had 30 days. They'd used them to insult, stall, sue, and lie. Now they would use the next 30 cleaning up the ruins they created. By 3:08 p.m., Marcel sent one final message for the day, a screenshot of a breaking news alert from Green Tech Watch. Solvanta ceases operations on core products amid IP revocation. CEO. HR head removed in emergency vote underneath it. He wrote, "Freedom doesn't always look like revenge. Sometimes it looks like closure." That night, Riley and I ordered takeout and ate on the floor, watching an old documentary about the Mars rovers. She laughed at the part where the engineers cried when the solar panels finally came back online. "Funny," she said. "They were crying for a machine?" "No," I said. "They were crying for what they built." She nodded. "Then maybe you're allowed to cry too." I didn't, but I could have, because what I built had been real, and what they tried to erase had come back louder, sharper, unshakable, and now, finally, I could let it go, not with fire, but with the quiet, steady breath of someone who has nothing left to prove. By 9:05 a.m. on a Thursday, Solvanta's board officially broke their silence. The message came not through lawyers, but in the form of a signed formal letter, hand-delivered by a courier to my doorstep. We respectfully request a meeting to discuss potential terms under which the license might be reinstated. Solvanta is prepared to offer full ownership recognition, profit sharing, and unrestricted authority regarding future deployment of your patented technologies. I read the letter twice. The irony, of course, was rich. 30 days ago, they mocked me, called me disgruntled, sued me, ignored the license they thought they could overwrite. Now, with production halted, clients vanishing, and their public image in freefall, they remembered who I was. No apology, just desperation. By 10:40 a.m., I called Marcel. "They're not asking for a deal," I said. "They're asking for resurrection." He chuckled dryly. "Then make them build a new altar." We drafted a reply, not a negotiation, but a non-negotiable proposal. I would not reinstate the license to the current Solvanta. That version of the company no longer aligned with the mission I helped birth. Instead, I offered them an alternative. The license would be granted to a restructured entity, one with a new name, new executive leadership, and a board that included independent engineers, sustainability experts, and, critically, me. Not as a consultant, not as a figurehead, but as a founding board partner with full voting rights and veto power on matters of ethical research. The last clause in our proposal read, "A permanent installation shall be erected in the new headquarters, visible, accessible, and untouchable. A founder's wall, inscribed with the original mission statement and the names of those who built the company's foundation. Beginning with Kaya Ellington, Vision Architect." At the bottom, in etched silver lettering, one phrase, "Innovation without integrity is just noise." By 3:02 p.m., the board accepted every condition, without edits. It took 6 months to complete the transition. I kept my distance from the early cleanup, the hiring, the damage control, the reckoning, but I watched from afar as new leadership was installed, and as engineers who had once been silenced were invited back to shape the future. And then, one spring morning, I walked through the glass doors of what was once Solvanta, and now bore a new name, Helix 9. The rebranded campus felt brighter, less about intimidation, more about intention. The founder's wall was placed in the central atrium, spotlit, stainless steel. My name wasn't the only one on it. Beside mine were the names of the other original engineers, including Henry, including Raj, including the quiet staffer who had once recorded a single moment that changed everything. As I stood in front of the wall, I saw a group of interns gathered nearby, staring. One of them, a young woman with wide eyes and a patent sketchpad in her hand, turned to me. "Did you really write that quote?" she asked. I nodded. 15 years ago, still true." She smiled. "I think it might be the first thing I saw that made me want to work here." And just like that, the arc had closed. The silence that had once followed my departure was now filled with purpose. Not mine alone, but shared. I left the building that afternoon without fanfare. No one chased me, no one erased me. I didn't need a title. I had something far stronger, a legacy reshaped on my own terms. Sometimes, power isn't about winning a battle. It's about refusing to let someone else define your worth. If you've ever felt erased, overlooked, or underestimated, let this story remind you, truth has a long memory, and your voice has value, even in silence. Drop a comment if you've ever stood up for yourself when no one else would. Like this video if Kaya's journey resonated with you. Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that quiet strength can move mountains. And don't forget to subscribe for more real stories of power, purpose, and poetic justice.